A cowboy found his ex-wife's sister at his gate. She said, "I came to forgive you both." The sun was going down behind the wide fields when he finished his last task of the day. The sky was painted in soft orange and pale purple, the kind of view he had seen 1,000 times but never truly enjoyed. Life on the ranch moved in circles, morning chores, long afternoons, quiet evenings. He liked it that way. Silence did not ask questions, and the land never reminded him of mistakes. He leaned against the wooden fence for a moment, wiping sweat from his forehead. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and soil. Somewhere in the distance, a horse neighed softly. This place had become his shelter after everything fell apart. People in town thought he chose isolation because he loved being alone. The truth was simpler. Out here, memories had fewer voices. He turned toward the house, an old farmhouse that creaked with every change in weather. It was sturdy, worn, and honest, much like him. He had fixed it little by little after the divorce, repairing broken boards and leaking pipes as if fixing the house might fix him too. Some nights he believed it worked. Other nights the quiet grew heavy. As he reached the porch steps, a sound broke the stillness. A sharp metallic knock echoed from the front gate. He froze. No one came this late. Neighbors lived miles away, and strangers rarely wandered down the long dirt road unless they were lost. His first thought was trouble. His second was that his past had finally found him. He waited, listening. The sound came again, slower this time, not urgent, not angry. He walked toward the gate, boots crunching against gravel. With every step, a strange feeling settled in his chest, something between fear and recognition. When he reached the gate and looked through the bars, his breath caught. She stood there quietly, hands folded in front of her, dust clinging to the hem of her coat. Her face was familiar in a way that hurt, not because he loved her, but because she belonged to a time he had tried so hard to forget. She was his ex-wife's sister. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved her hair gently, and her eyes met his without anger. That alone unsettled him. He had expected blame or coldness or even tears. What he saw instead was calm, tired but steady. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she said softly. He cleared his throat. "Most people don't come looking for me." She nodded, as if she understood that better than he knew. "May I come in?" He hesitated, then unlocked the gate. The metal creaked as it opened, a sound that felt louder than it should have. She stepped inside, looking around at the land, the house, the open sky. It felt like she was stepping into his guarded world. They walked toward the porch in silence. He noticed how thin she looked, how travel-worn her shoes were. She had come a long way. Whatever her reason was, it mattered enough to cross distance and memory. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and wood. He gestured for her to sit, then poured water into 2 glasses. His hands were steady, but his thoughts were not. Questions crowded his mind, but he did not know which one to ask first. She held the glass with both hands, warming them. Then she looked up at him and said the words he would remember long after she left. "I came to forgive you both." The room seemed to shrink. He stared at her, unsure he had heard correctly. Forgiveness was not something he expected to find at his door, especially not from her. "Forgive me?" he asked slowly. "And my sister," she replied. "Both of you." He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You must be mistaken," he said. "I don't think there's anything left to forgive." Her eyes softened. "That's not true. There's a lot that was never said." The words stirred something deep inside him. Memories surfaced, arguments that ended too soon, nights filled with silence, mornings where love felt like an obligation instead of a choice. He had carried those memories like stones in his pockets, weighing him down without realizing it. He sat across from her, the distance between them feeling smaller than it should have. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come here after all this time?" She looked toward the window, where the last light of day faded into dusk. "Because holding on to anger was destroying us," she said, "and because time doesn't heal what we refuse to face." He thought of his ex-wife, how they had promised forever and broken it without understanding why. He had blamed her for leaving. He had blamed himself for failing. He had never blamed the silence that grew between them or the pride that kept them from reaching out. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but intent doesn't erase pain." Her honesty surprised him. She was not there to defend or accuse. She was there to speak truths no one else had dared to say. She told him how she had watched their marriage fall apart from the outside, how she had seen both of them pull away instead of pulling closer, how she had wanted to speak up but stayed silent, thinking it wasn't her place. That silence, she admitted, was something she carried with regret. "I came because forgiveness can't happen in pieces," she said, "and I couldn't forgive her without forgiving you too." He leaned back in his chair, feeling something loosen inside him. For years he had replayed the past, searching for a moment that could have changed everything. Now he realized there were many moments and many chances that none of them took. Night fell completely, wrapping the house in darkness. He turned on a lamp, its warm light filling the room. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, steady and patient. They talked for hours, about mistakes, about fear, about how love can fade when people stop listening. He admitted things he had never said aloud, how he felt unworthy of forgiveness, how the ranch became his hiding place, how he believed solitude was easier than reconciliation. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she simply said, "Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about releasing the hold it has on us." Those words stayed with him. He realized that maybe this visit was not an accident or a coincidence. Maybe it was the moment he had been avoiding. When the night grew late, he offered her the guest room. As she walked down the hallway, she paused and turned back. "Thank you for opening the gate," she said. He nodded. "I didn't know I needed to." After she closed the door, he stood alone in the living room. The house felt different, less empty, less heavy. Outside, the gate stood open, swaying slightly in the night breeze. For the first time in years, he did not rush to close it. Morning arrived slowly at the ranch. The light crept in through the thin curtains, touching the wooden floor and the quiet furniture. He woke before the sun fully rose, the way he always did. Habit had become his clock. For a moment, he forgot she was there. Then the memory returned, clear and heavy, like a stone placed gently on his chest. He sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The house was still. No voices, no movement, just the low sound of wind brushing against the walls. He stood, washed his face, and stepped outside. The air was cool, fresh, and honest. He liked mornings because they did not carry yesterday's weight yet. As he fed the animals and checked the fences, his thoughts kept drifting back. Her words from the night before stayed with him. Forgiveness. Release. Facing what was never faced. He had avoided those ideas for years, telling himself he was fine. Yet now, they followed him through every task. When he returned to the house, the smell of coffee met him at the door. She stood at the small kitchen table, pouring coffee into chipped mugs. She looked more rested than she had the night before, but there was still a quiet seriousness in her eyes. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I couldn't sleep much." He shook his head. "Make yourself at home." They sat across from each other, steam rising between them. For a while they drank in silence. It was not awkward. It felt thoughtful, like both of them were preparing for something important. She spoke first. "I kept thinking about the early days," she said, "before everything went wrong." He nodded slowly. "So did I." He remembered those days clearly. He and his ex-wife were young, hopeful, and stubborn in the way people are when they believe love alone can solve everything. They talked about dreams, not problems. They laughed easily, but they never learned how to argue, how to listen when things hurt. "It didn't fall apart all at once," he said. "It happened quietly." She looked at him, encouraging him to continue. "We stopped talking," he said. "Not fighting, just talking. I thought silence meant peace. I was wrong." She sighed softly. "She thought you stopped caring." That sentence struck him harder than he expected. He had always believed she knew he cared even when he was distant. Hearing that she didn't hurt in a way that words could not easily fix. "She never said that," he replied. "She didn't know how," her sister said. "Neither of you did." As the morning passed, they spoke about moments that once seemed small but now felt important. Missed dinners, unanswered questions, days when pride spoke louder than love. He realized how often he had chosen being right over being kind. She shared her own burden, how she had seen signs of trouble but stayed silent, how she believed stepping in would make things worse. "I told myself it wasn't my marriage," she said, "but I was wrong. Silence helped break it." They went outside together later, walking along the fence line. The land stretched endlessly, calm and patient. She asked about the ranch, about how he managed everything alone. He told her how the work kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. "It's easier to fix fences than feelings," he admitted. She smiled sadly. "That sounds like you." They stopped near the gate where they first met the night before. He remembered how tense he felt then, how closed off. Now standing there in daylight, it looked less like a barrier and more like a doorway. "You know," she said, "forgiveness doesn't mean saying no one was wrong." He looked at her. "Then what does it mean?" "It means understanding why people did what they did," she replied, "and choosing not to carry that pain forward." That afternoon, they sat on the porch as clouds drifted slowly overhead. He told her about the nights he lay awake replaying the past, wondering what moment he could change. He confessed that part of him believed he deserved the loneliness. "You don't," she said firmly. "Neither does she." Her certainty surprised him. He had lived so long with guilt that the idea of letting it go felt strange, almost unsafe. As evening approached, she grew quiet. He noticed her watching the road, thoughtful. "You're thinking about her," he said. She nodded. "She doesn't know I'm here." That made his chest tighten. The thought of his ex-wife hearing about this visit, about forgiveness, stirred emotions he was not ready to name. "She's not ready," her sister continued. "But she will need to hear the truth. All of it." He swallowed. "So will I." Dinner was simple. Bread, soup, and quiet reflection. The past hung between them, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like something that could be understood. That night, as the stars filled the sky, he realized something had shifted. Not everything was fixed. Nothing was undone. But for the first time, he felt less trapped by yesterday. He stood at the porch again, looking out at the land. Somewhere out there was a future he had stopped imagining. And for the first time in years, he wondered what it might look like if he allowed himself to move toward it. The third day began with heavy clouds hanging low over the ranch. The sky looked uncertain, as if it could either clear or break into rain at any moment. He noticed it as soon as he stepped outside. It felt fitting. Something inside him felt the same way, unsettled, waiting. She was already awake. He heard soft movement in the kitchen and the faint sound of a kettle. When he entered, she was standing by the window, staring out at the fields as if searching for something that could not be seen. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She turned and gave a small smile. "I slept, but my mind didn't rest." He understood that too well. They sat together at the table again, the familiar silence between them now filled with meaning rather than discomfort. There was something unspoken, pressing gently but firmly, asking to be acknowledged. "I think today we need to talk about what we've been avoiding," she said. He took a deep breath. "I was hoping you wouldn't say that," she nodded. "I know, but this is why I came." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows softly. He wrapped his hands around his mug, grounding himself. "Where do we start?" "With the truth," she replied. "Even the parts that hurt." He looked down, gathering his thoughts. For years, he had shaped the story of his marriage in a way that helped him survive. But survival was no longer enough. He needed honesty now. "I was afraid," he said slowly, "not of her, but of failing her. Every time she needed more from me, I felt smaller. Instead of saying that, I shut down." She listened closely, not interrupting. "I thought providing was enough," he continued. "I didn't realize she needed presence, not just effort." Her sister's eyes filled slightly, but she did not look away. She felt invisible, she said, like she was living beside you, not with you. That sentence settled heavily between them. He nodded, accepting it. I see that now. Then she spoke about herself again, about how she had noticed changes long before the marriage ended, how laughter faded, how tension replaced comfort. I told myself couples go through phases, she said, but deep down I knew something was wrong. Why didn't you say anything? He asked gently. She looked away. Because I was afraid too, afraid of choosing sides, afraid of being blamed, afraid of making it worse. They shared a quiet understanding then. Fear had shaped all of their choices. Later that morning they went for a walk down the dirt road. The clouds finally released a light rain, cool and steady. They didn't turn back. The rain felt cleansing, honest. He told her about the day his ex-wife left, how there was no shouting, no dramatic goodbye. Just tired eyes and a quiet decision. I watched her pack, he said, and I didn't stop her. That hurt her the most, the sister said softly. She thought it meant you didn't care enough to fight. He stopped walking. The rain soaked his jacket, but he barely noticed. I wanted to, he said. I just didn't know how. They stood there in the rain, letting the truth settle. For years he had replayed that moment but never fully understood it. Now clarity came with pain, but also relief. Back at the house, they dried off and sat near the window. The rain slowed, then stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, touching the wet ground. She blamed herself, the sister said quietly. She thought she wasn't enough. He closed his eyes, the weight of that realization pressing hard against his chest. I never wanted her to feel that way. I know, she said, but feelings don't follow intentions. That afternoon she asked him a question he had never asked himself. If she stood at this gate today, what would you say? He didn't answer right away. He imagined it, the same gate, the same dust, the same memories, but he was not the same man. I would listen, he said finally. I would tell her the truth, even if it didn't change anything. She smiled gently. That's growth. As evening came, they talked about forgiveness again, not as a final act but as a process. She explained that forgiving did not mean removing responsibility. It meant accepting the past without letting it define the future. I forgave you, she said, because holding on to anger kept me tied to a story that was already over. He thought about that long after she went to rest. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt honest. He stood by the gate that night, touching the cold metal. He realized that forgiveness had already begun, not just from her, but from himself. And for the first time, he believed that facing the past did not mean being trapped by it. The fourth day began with a calm that felt almost fragile. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the ranch. Birds called softly in the distance, and the wind whispered through the trees. It was the kind of morning that made him pause, even with the weight of his past pressing quietly on his shoulders. She had been awake for some time, tending to small chores in the kitchen. He watched her from the doorway for a moment, noticing the way her hands moved with care, how her eyes softened when she focused on something simple like setting a table or arranging flowers from the garden. It was a kind of grace he had not noticed before, a patience that made him realize there was more strength in her than he had ever imagined. "Morning," he said, stepping into the kitchen. His voice sounded strange to him, like it belonged to someone from a life long ago. "Good morning," she replied, looking up and offering a gentle smile. "I didn't hear you wake up." "I'm quiet in the mornings," he said. "It helps me think." She nodded knowingly. "It's the same for me. Mornings let you see things clearly before the world gets noisy." They shared a small breakfast together, simple bread and coffee, but there was a weight in the air that made every sip feel important. He thought about what they had discussed the day before: truth, honesty, and the slow work of understanding mistakes. Today, it seemed, they would have to go deeper. After breakfast, she suggested a walk through the property. The land stretched far and wide, the green fields bordered by the worn fences he had repaired with his own hands. He liked showing her the ranch. It was a piece of his life untouched by time, a space where work and nature created a rhythm he could depend on. "I wanted to come here first," she said softly, "because this place carries so much of your story, and her story too." He looked at her, unsure if he wanted to hear more, but her voice was calm, steady, inviting him to open the door he had long kept closed. "Go on," he said. "Tell me." She spoke of her sister, not with judgment but with understanding. How she had watched the marriage quietly fall apart, how she had wanted to intervene but feared making things worse. She admitted that her silence had sometimes felt like betrayal, but she had always hoped that time or circumstances would fix what words could not. He listened carefully, realizing that she had carried her own burden of guilt alongside the regrets he had tried to bury. Their pain was different, but it had grown from the same roots: misunderstandings, pride, and fear. "I came because forgiveness needs truth," she said. "Not just between me and you, but for both of us and for her too." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand, but I don't know if she can hear it yet. I don't even know if I can say it myself." "You will," she replied, "but first you have to be honest with yourself. You have to see the past clearly without excuses." As they walked along the dirt road, the sun rose higher, scattering light across the fields. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant sound of animals, the soft crunch of boots on gravel, it all felt like the world itself was holding space for their conversation. He began to speak, hesitantly at first. He admitted moments when he had failed as a husband, not because he did not care, but because he had been afraid of vulnerability. He spoke of the nights he had spent alone, replaying arguments, wondering what he could have done differently. He told her how he had believed that providing for her and his family was enough, not realizing that love required presence, attention, and honesty. She listened without interruption, nodding gently, sometimes offering a word, sometimes just letting the silence speak. Then she shared her own reflections, moments when she had seen signs of unhappiness and done nothing. How she had wished she had spoken up, had guided, had encouraged communication instead of staying silent. Their conversation turned to the day of the separation. He described the quiet departure, the absence of confrontation, the loneliness that had filled the house after she left. She shared her sister's perspective, how the silence felt like rejection, and how every unspoken word had grown into a wall between them. He felt the weight of her words like a hand pressing against his chest. He realized that for years he had carried guilt, regret, and misunderstanding all alone, when in truth, they had all been trapped in the same storm of miscommunication. By midday, they returned to the porch. The air was warm now, sunlight streaming through the trees and touching the worn wooden floor. She turned to him and said, "The hardest part of forgiveness is admitting we were all wrong in some way. None of us is perfect." He looked at her, the truth of her words settling deep. "I wanted to fix everything by myself," he said, "but I see now that it required all of us facing it together, even if that was impossible at the time." She smiled softly. "Exactly. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a process, and it often begins with understanding." As the afternoon wore on, they spoke about what it meant to let go. To release anger, resentment, and blame without pretending the past did not exist. They talked about their own fears, their own mistakes, and the ways they had been shaped by events they could not change. He confessed that he had never imagined hearing these words of forgiveness. He had expected confrontation, or anger, or silence. But what he had received instead was something far heavier, far more valuable: honesty, understanding, and a chance to reconcile with the past within himself. The sky shifted as evening approached, clouds breaking to reveal streaks of gold and pink. They sat together on the porch, watching the light move across the fields. There was no need for words for a long while. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was thoughtful, filled with reflection and the beginnings of peace. Finally, she spoke again. Tomorrow we may have to face her, but for now I think we needed this day to be honest, to understand, to prepare ourselves. He nodded. I'm ready for that, for whatever comes next. Night fell slowly. The stars emerged one by one, clear and bright in the vast sky. The house was quiet but no longer felt empty. He walked to the gate once more, touching the cool metal and thinking about the words he had heard, the truths he had spoken, and the forgiveness that had begun to take root. He realized that facing the past was not about returning to it. It was about seeing it clearly, acknowledging the pain, and allowing space for growth. And for the first time in many years, he felt that growth stirring inside him, promising something new, a chance at peace, at understanding, at letting go. The night was calm, but inside him, something had shifted. He no longer felt trapped by what had been lost. He felt a quiet hope, fragile but present, like the first light of dawn on a long, uncertain road. Tomorrow, the real challenge would come. But tonight he allowed himself to rest, knowing that the hardest part, the confrontation with truth, the reckoning with emotions, was already underway. And that was a beginning worth holding onto. The fifth day began quietly. The sun was just starting to climb over the horizon, casting soft light across the ranch. He stepped outside and breathed deeply, feeling the crisp morning air fill his lungs. After days of reflection, conversation, and understanding, he felt a strange calmness. The past was still there, but for the first time it no longer controlled him. She was already awake, moving around the kitchen with her usual calm and thoughtful precision. The house smelled faintly of coffee and baked bread, a small comfort, simple and grounding. He watched her for a moment, noticing the little things he had missed before. The gentle way she handled objects, the way her eyes softened as she focused on small tasks, and the quiet strength in her posture. "Morning," he said, stepping in with a cup of coffee he had poured himself. "Good morning," she replied. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," he admitted. They sat together at the table, drinking in silence for a few minutes. The weight of the past was still there, but it felt different now, not heavy or suffocating, but manageable, like a memory that could be remembered without pain. "I think today will be difficult," she said softly. "We need to face the one who left. She needs to hear what we've discussed." He nodded, his stomach twisting with nervous anticipation. The thought of confronting his ex-wife, of speaking truths he had avoided for years, filled him with a mix of fear and relief. He had prepared himself, but he knew this would be different from the conversations they had shared over the past days. They left the house together, walking slowly down the dirt road toward the town. The wind was soft, rustling the leaves gently. She spoke first, explaining that forgiveness was a choice, not an obligation. It was something they could offer, but it would not necessarily change the past. He listened carefully, taking in her words. He realized that she was right. Forgiveness was not about undoing mistakes. It was about releasing the hold those mistakes had over them. When they arrived at her sister's home, he hesitated at the gate. Memories flooded back, the arguments, the silence, the moments he had wished he could change. But her presence at his side gave him courage. She smiled gently, silently reminding him that he was not alone in this. They knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened. There she stood, his ex-wife. Time had softened some edges, but her eyes still held the memories of their shared past. He felt a rush of emotion, regret, sorrow, and a surprising spark of hope. They stepped inside, exchanging cautious greetings. The atmosphere was tense but not hostile. She had her own questions, her own fears, but she was willing to listen. Her sister spoke first, sharing the journey of forgiveness they had walked together. She explained that holding on to anger and resentment had only caused more pain, and that forgiveness was not about forgetting but about understanding. Then he spoke, his voice steady but quiet. He admitted his mistakes, his fears, and the ways he had failed. He spoke not to justify himself but to be honest. He acknowledged her feelings, her pain, and the ways he had contributed to it. His ex-wife listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes remaining silent. She had her own reflections, her own truths to share. As the conversation unfolded, the tension in the room began to shift. The air, once thick with unspoken words and past mistakes, became lighter, more open. They spoke for hours, revisiting moments that had caused misunderstandings and hurt. He realized that many of the painful memories had been fueled by assumptions, miscommunication, and pride. By speaking openly, they began to untangle the knots that had tied them together in pain. Outside, the sun began to lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. They took a short walk together, each step a quiet act of reconciliation. There was no promise of restoring what had been lost, but there was a recognition that they could move forward without carrying the weight of anger and guilt. As the evening approached, they returned to the house. He felt a sense of closure forming, fragile but real. Forgiveness had been offered and received, not as a grand gesture, but as an honest acknowledgement of their shared past. His ex-wife and her sister left the ranch, stepping back into the world with lighter hearts. He watched them go, the gate closing gently behind them. The ranch was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. The silence now held peace, understanding, and a sense of freedom that had been missing for years. He walked to the porch, looking out at the fields. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. He thought about the journey he had walked over the past days, the conversations, the reflections, the moments of honesty and vulnerability. Each step had brought him closer to release, to understanding, to the quiet strength of forgiveness. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope for the future. Not because the past could be changed, but because he had faced it, accepted it, and released it. He realized that forgiveness was not about reunion or fixing what was broken. It was about finding peace within oneself. As night fell, he stood by the gate, letting the cool breeze wash over him. The stars appeared one by one in the clear sky, bright and steady. The land around him felt alive, patient, and enduring. He felt ready to continue his life, carrying the lessons of the past without letting them weigh him down. In that quiet moment, he understood that life moves forward, even after mistakes, heartbreak, and separation. Forgiveness had opened a new path, a path that led not back to what was lost, but toward a future where the past no longer held power. He stepped inside the house, closing the door softly behind him. The ranch, the fields, the quiet home, all of it seemed different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. He had faced the past, spoken the truth, and embraced forgiveness. And for the first time in many years, he felt truly free. The night wrapped the ranch in calm, but inside him, a light burned steadily. It was the light of understanding, acceptance, and hope. He knew that tomorrow would come with its own work, its own challenges, and its own quiet joys. But he was ready, and he was at peace. The gate, once a barrier of memories and regrets, now felt like a threshold between what had been and what could be. He leaned against it for a moment, taking in the quiet beauty of the night, and finally smiled. Life, he realized, was waiting, open, honest, and forgiving.